Hello, and welcome to this introductory video on 6th grade. Today we're going to be talking about 6th grade, we're going to be talking about the 12-year-old, and we're going to be talking about other stuff that puts it into context. But before we get into this, what do you know about 6th grade and the 6th grader? Or what do you think you know? Go ahead and pause and reflect on that and maybe write down everything you think you know about 6th grade and the 6th grader as a kind of archetype and how to teach them. And then you can compare that to what you learned from this video. So compare what you write down now to what you've learned by the end of it. So go ahead and pause and do that now. Okay, great, so let's get into this. Now, before talking about the curriculum of 6th grade specifically, let's talk about some child development because, we really need to be cognizant of this. This is the thing about Waldorf education that sets it apart from pretty much anything else that I've encountered in my life in the realm of education, is that Waldorf education has a very clear picture of the steps of child development. The developing human being, not just the child, but actually over the lifespan, is a lot like a plant, okay? You know that the different organs of the plant develop at different times in the life cycle of the plant, or the cycle of the year, right? And just as if you want a ripe apple, it would be inappropriate to pluck that apple from the tree when it's when the petals of the flower are just starting to wither and that apple is just a little ovary developing. Just as it would be inappropriate to pluck that small developing ovary of an apple at that time and hope that you're going to get a nice juicy sweet apple, so is it also inappropriate in the development of a child to bring certain things to them in their education when they're not ready for it. So that's why we do the things we do at certain times in Waldorf education. This is really important. I see a lot of schools just kind of throwing this to the wayside because they just don't have an understanding of how a child's consciousness develops. For example, I'm not going to bring a hard science like physics. When I say hard, I don't mean like difficult. I mean like hard, something that's about the physical world in this very kind of mineral way. I'm not going to bring that to a 6-year-old, right? A 6-year-old is still living in a fairyland. And so the content we bring to a 6-year-old, which personally, I wouldn't even bring academic content, just stories, would be appropriate. They would be like fairy tales and folk tales type of things. So let's just keep that in mind. So that's why I'm trying to give you a background here of what we're doing, because I want you to understand the vital importance of doing the right things at the right time. The right thing at the right time brought to the child is like nectar that nourishes the soul. And the right thing at the wrong time is like a kind of an anti-nutrient, like a poison even. So just keep that in mind. We can do a great deal of harm by forcing a child out of their natural consciousness. All right? So let's get into this. So we're talking about 6th grade. We're really talking about the 12-year change here. But in order to talk about the 12-year change, let's talk about the 6-year change and the 9-year change. Just put it into context. There's a lot of changes that happen in a human being's life. You might have experienced some of them yourself, I'm just guessing. Well, 6-year change, this is kind of like one of the first big milestones. Well, there's a lot of milestones in early childhood, but this is like, they call it the first puberty. So, you know, they're almost out of early childhood, which goes from 0 to 7. They're not quite there yet, but, you know, their teeth are changing. And the changing of the teeth is this symbol or this sign that these forces, which have been shaping the structures and the nervous system of your child's body, have now basically finished their work and can now be freed for other things. So it's a kind of intellectual birthing, but don't be confused by what that means. That doesn't mean it's time to bring algebra to them. It just means that they're starting to emerge into a new period where they're going to be ready for school, 1st grade, okay? And, you know, the beginning of academics brought through a very lively and imaginative and action-based way, okay? You know, sometimes parents can find 6-year-olds to be a little bit oppositional and that sort of thing. It's like a first puberty. Their limbs get a little bit longer and stuff like that. But it's not a true puberty, all right? 9-year change. This is characteristic, 3rd grade, of a confrontation with the self. And this is actually an astrological thing. So this happens at the same time in the life of every human being, all right? So just in case, you know, some people think, well, my child didn't go through that, or it's relative, or, you know, like, you know, yeah, children are going to experience these things with different intensities, depending on their temperament and other factors. But the things that are happening on a bigger picture level are happening to this, you know, to every child in the same way. So let me be clear about this. This is one of the things about Waldorf education that's important, is that these changes that we talk about, these are universal, this is universal geometry, okay? These aren't relative things. You know, like you can maybe force a child to get into puberty sooner by giving them, you know, unhealthy food with lots of hormones and exposing them to lots of inappropriate content and stuff like that. You can sort of unnaturally bring on a puberty sooner. But if we're following this kind of universal geometry, which is what creates health, right? That's what this is based on, okay? And this ain't gonna change anytime soon. I might have a little bit of an edge here in saying all this, but I'm saying that because I've heard parents go, it doesn't apply to my child, doesn't apply to my child, doesn't apply to my child. It would behoove us to understand deeply the roots of all this before we say, doesn't apply to my child, all right? This is astrological, the first confrontation with the self, okay? In early childhood, the child is living out into their environment. And if you ever doubt this, and you know, young children watch them, if all the adults start laughing around them, they'll start laughing. They don't even know why. They don't understand the joke. It's way beyond them, but they're laughing, okay? You know, on the other hand, if everybody's tense around them, you know, they're gonna start expressing anxiety and they're gonna start acting out and stuff like that. I was just thinking this morning about, there's a diagnosis in American psychology called oppositional defiance disorder that they often give to young children. You know, it's like as if there's something wrong with the child. You know, and I just want to say, what's wrong with their environment? Let's look at that first before we slap a label on them, oppositional defiant disorder. Anyway, I'm pontificating. Early childhood, they're living out. They're out in their environment. They're totally living through you, right? Which is why it can be hard to get a break. As a parent of a young child, it's like, oh, can I just get a break? Oh, can I just go to the bathroom already? Right? 9 years old, something shifts. They have this confrontation with the self, and that can bring a lot of insecurity. 9-year-olds are often, they start, maybe getting scared of the dark then, or, they might even start having fears of death. They might ask you more spiritual questions like, who's God? Does he exist? Am I adopted? What happens after we pass, through death? Is there an afterlife? And it's an important time to kind of hold the child, to just let them go through it and just be there as a support, and also to reassure them. When they maybe ask you these deeper questions about life, have answers, have imaginative answers for them. Otherwise, they get even more insecure. But they come through the 9-year change and they get into 4th grade and they're strong. That's why we bring warrior stories and Norse myths and stuff like that. They're ready for the rumpus and the rabble rousing. So then the next big change is the 12-year change. And this is what we're hitting in 6th grade, all right? All right, 12-year change. You will often, if you have your child in a Waldorf school until then, they often go, once they hit 6th grade, they go, I'm ready for a change. Take me out of this, child's school. Take me to a real school. Well, the child doesn't necessarily understand that it's possible to also be intellectually challenged at a Waldorf school too, right? They just associated it with the fairies and the leprechauns and the gnomes and all that stuff that comes from early childhood. They don't want to have anything to do with that anymore. It's like, give me the real stuff. Come on. So if we do this right, what we're going to do is we're going to change our gesture when we hit 6th grade. In 5th grade, they hit a graceful moment of their development. That's why we bring Greece in 5th grade, because of the aesthetics, right? And they also come to a point of physical development in 5th grade, which is like, really nice. And they often develop more of a prowess and everything before the chaos of 12 years old and everything that comes after that hits, right? 5th graders are like, it's good. 6th graders are like, how do I walk with this weird, lanky body now, right? Like the limbs are growing. And the bones are hardening. This is very important. This is why they start wanting more of an intellectual challenge, like what I call the intellectual teeth. Their muscles are toning, their bones are hardening. And there's this connection between the hardness of the bones and the intellect, which becomes interested in the physical sensory world. That's why, starting in 6th grade, then we start to bring the hard sciences like physics, like geology, mineralogy, like astronomy. That's the reason. Because their intellect is now interested. They want to learn about the physical laws of the world. And so that's why we bring these more intellectual sciences. All right? Starting at this time. Now, hitherto, we brought botany and zoology. Those are a little bit more, they're not as mineral, right? Like plants are alive and so are animals, but stones are not. Stones are dead, right? the physical laws of the world are like also a kind of dead thing. They're mineral, okay? So, zoology in 4th grade, botany in 5th grade, when they're still in this living element. 6th grade, the bones harden, and the bones are the part of our body which are dead. They're stones, okay? And so that's why we bring the dead sciences now. I'm not using dead as a judgment. I just mean, about the mineral world, which is not imbued with the forces of growth and life and respiration and all that, okay? So they want a challenge, and they get that through, physics, for example. We're going to experiment now, and you're going to have to observe, and you're going to have to start to draw some of your own conclusions, all right? So what else do we bring in 6th grade to match this? Actually, you know what? Before I do that, let me explain a few other things here to go along with this. So in early childhood, 0 to 7, the child is living on a soul level. They're living in their will. What is the will? It's the part of us that does stuff, that walks balance beams, that walks along monkey bars, that does rough and tumble wrestling, or even that likes to play dress up and pretend. All of these things are living in the will. Okay, 0 to 7 on a soul level, it's will. On a physical level, you see that the young child is a head being, right? The head is abnormally large in the early phase of life. Everybody knows that, right? Have you ever read Where the Wild Things Are? It's like one of my favorite children's books. All those wild things, you notice how big their heads are? They're like infantile creatures. But it's just interesting that there's this polarity here, because the will is about your limbs, right? It's about doing stuff out in the world, running, jumping, playing. So there's this opposition. On a soul level, they're in willing. On a physical level, they're in head, right? 7 to 14, the middle space of childhood. They're really developing a feeling life. Oh, and by the way, this is why in early childhood, it's important not to do intellectual things. Don't stimulate their head forces. Don't ask them a bunch of questions at dinner. Don't do it. Let them be children. Let them experience the world. Then 7 to 14, the feeling life. These are traditionally the grades, right, in Waldorf education. And 7 to 11, I wrote 7 to 11 here because it becomes, really most intense. Actually, I would really say between 9 and 11. But on a soul level, it's their feeling life that's developing. That's why it's important to give them lots of stories and do lots of art in these middle years, because guess what's developing? Their heart, their moral and aesthetic sense, their ability to perceive what is beautiful. So early childhood is the ability to sense what is good. Middle childhood, the ability to sense what is beautiful. Not just artistically beautiful, but morally beautiful. What Martin Luther King did was morally beautiful, right? What Jesus Christ did was morally beautiful. What Krishna, Buddha, Hildegard von Bingen, Rabia al-Basra, all these extraordinary human beings from history, what they did is good and morally beautiful and true, but that's the later time of development. Physically, in these middle years, you can see that they have a kind of a soft body. Their muscles aren't toned yet. They're still kind of soft. And their chest is developing. Like grades children, I would say before 6th grade especially, if you look at them, they often have this abnormally protruding chest. They're like chest beings. Look at them, observe them, you'll see that. It's kind of interesting. And of course, they're developing their heart and their feeling self. All right? Now, this actually does continue through 14, but around 12, the chick of puberty starts trying to poke through the egg and hatch itself. And it's not quite there yet in most cases, but it's just starting. Now, I know, girls, start menstruating at different times, right? So you might say, oh, mine started at 9 or mine started at 11. I know. I mean, the actual physical expression of it may vary. Honestly, our modern way of life might be bringing that on earlier. Maybe in not so healthy a way. But on a soul level, again, the geometry remains. So on a soul level, it's really, puberty, I would say between 12 and 14, even a little bit later on a soul level, even if physically it's happening earlier. So, 12-year change. They start getting more interested in truth. That's the intellectual piece, right? Goodness, beauty, truth. Now they'll really get interested in truth around 13, 14, and into the high school years. That's when they start getting really critical, right? But at 12, you'll see it. They start arguing more. They start getting more like have a kind of mocking sense to them, right? They might start calling you names. Not really insulting names, but just sort of playing with the idea of, I don't have to listen to them. And of course, children do this at all ages, right? But at 12, you'll see it'll take on a more serious note, right? And so we actually bring Roman history, Rome, Islam, Middle Ages at this time, and Rome, of course, the Greco-Roman times happened back to back, and in the ancient Pythagorean school, mystery school, the initiation involved the candidate coming before the whole crowd of Pythagoreans and being asked these impossible questions, and when they couldn't answer, they got relentlessly mocked. And if they could withstand it, then they would be, permitted entry into the school. But if they got angry and lashed out, then they would not be allowed entry to the school. This sort of mockery matches this time in life, all right? And so they hear the stories of these Roman emperors who are probably the most egotistical human beings ever to live on planet Earth. Of course, they're not the only ones. There are other examples before and after Roman history, but it's especially concentrated in Roman history. God. Wow, it's hard to teach, to be honest with you. And yet the children just eat it up. They can't get enough. I always wondered about that. And then I had a colleague one time whose daughter was in my 6th grade class, and she said, well, they really are egotists at this age. And I thought, oh, that's why they're so fascinated by these stories. And so, in a way, these stories of the Romans are outwardly speaking to what they're experiencing inwardly, because every human being needs to rebel. Let me repeat this again. Every human being needs to rebel. Did you hear me? I'm going to say that one more time. Every human being needs to rebel. Why am I saying that? Because you as a parent need to respect the rebellion. Because that human being, that child, is developing their own self, their own thoughts, and that's what's ultimately going to allow them to make decisions freely and impart meaning and direction to their own life. So don't get stuck in the mud with them. You got to stay above. You have to respect the rebellion and not take it personally, and instead work with it. So there's a way, Kim John Payne actually has a great advice for how to work with the different ages of child development in his book, The Soul of Discipline. I highly recommend it. And one of the things he says is that, in this stage of life, you want to move into a way of working with their children where they can give input on decisions, like where we're going to go on vacation this year, or when bedtime should be. But you're still going to make the decision. You're welcoming the input. It's like, okay, I'll hear what you have to say, and I'm still going to decide. All right? That's how you start to work with the rebellion at this stage. Later on in high school and certainly in college, it's more, you become more of a trusted expert, where it's like, okay, let's work together, so that we can help you accomplish your goals. It's not time for that yet. That much freedom would be harmful at this age, okay? The consciousness is not ready there. And I've seen children whose parents thought, no, they really are ready for it. And these were some of the most anxious children I've ever seen. So you got to do this stepwise. And I'm telling you, at this stage, what you want to do is let them contribute to the thoughts, but you still make the decisions. Now, I'm not talking about every single decision, like, oh, what do you want to eat or something like that. Obviously, they're going to have some autonomy with that, right? Well, what do you want to do in your free time, kind of thing. But on the bigger decisions, you still have to hold the reins, all right? So ancient Rome, Islam, Middle Ages, they need to hear about all this history. Another thing about Greece and Rome that I have to say, because in these times, there's a lot of questioning. Why are we teaching about those Western cultures? Look at what they've done to the planet. Yeah, they have definitely done bad things to the planet. But we don't teach about Greece and Rome to glorify them. We teach about them because they have been provided the foundation of so much of world culture, especially Western culture. And so if you don't understand where these forces came from, you can't work with them and improve upon them, understand their benefits and their drawbacks. It's like democracy. When we teach democracy in 5th grade, hey, it's this great new thing. Freedom from tyranny. Great. Sounds awesome. That's a benefit. What are the downsides? Well, as Benjamin Franklin said, democracy is like two wolves and a sheep deciding what's for dinner. You get the point. And the other thing is, the Athenians denied women and slaves the right to participate. Pretty hypocritical, wouldn't you say? And so when we're teaching about these cultures, same thing with the Roman Republic, we tell the truth. And the children can then have this balanced view. Benefits, drawbacks, right? We want them to have this flexible thinking so that they can participate in this society, which is very much based on these cultures, in a creative way. That's not to say that we're not also going to talk about indigenous cultures. We should, and we will. But just to say, we're not going to leave out these cultures just because it seems to be like the in vogue thing to do, right? Actually, I think it's quite valuable when you teach about ancient Roman Republic government on the one hand, and then you do a lesson about the Haudenosaunee Confederacy in the from Turtle Island, that is United States, and you can compare them and contrast. And that's actually very rich. That's very rich, right? So thereby we can actually have a really a holistic curriculum here that makes the best of everything. All right, so you hear about, history from Rome through Middle Ages. And, I'll also say that's important, like feudalism, right? It's important to understand those things because they give the children a foundation of the economic reality of European life, which led into the Industrial Revolution, which has now become a global reality, right? And then they can understand, again, the benefits, but also the real pitfalls of that. Because we need children to understand the economic foundations of world culture desperately today, because it's such a in-our-face issue. Speaking of which, we do business math in 6th grade. And this is, I think, one of the most important blocks in the whole 8 years of Waldorf education. Why? Well, because children need to understand business. They need to understand how money works. I hear it said so often amongst people of my generation. When they start learning about business, they go, nobody taught us this in schools. Yeah, they didn't. They used to teach it in schools in my parents' generation. And guess what the baby boomers did? They used that knowledge to make themselves well off. And then somehow it was mysteriously taken out of school curriculum. I wonder why. Well, it has to go back in. And so business math is a way to start applying, the arithmetic they've learned in the first 5 years of education to something really practical. And if we, and I encourage students to start a business, even if it's a lemonade stand. Take some initiative, have experience with it. Even if they grow up some of them will grow up to create businesses, and that's a good thing, right? That's a very good thing. Others may grow up and choose to be an employee, but if they do, it won't be because they don't understand money. It will be because they do, and they just choose to work as an employee. But this is a serious gaping hole in our society. We have whole generations that know nothing about money, and it allows an unsustainable system to continue. All right? And I'm certainly not preaching communism. But what I am preaching is self-empowerment. And I think we all want that for our children. Business math. We also do geometry. In 6th grade, precision geometry. So in 5th grade, we did freehand geometry. But now with the bones, hardening of the bones, in 6th grade, we start using precision tools. And what that allows us to do is take it out of just the will and then bring geometry into the thinking. And of course, we still engage the feeling through beauty. But in 6th grade geometry, we are challenging them to construct challenging forms through a combination of their doing experimentation and their thinking. And this is one of the most important connections we can make for a child. The connection between this and this. Okay? If we can learn to think with our hands, whoa, we're going to be exceptionally creative human beings. Because what we do with this when we're young becomes this later on in life. That's another reason why young children should not be engaged intellectually. Let them figure stuff out. And then later, they will be brilliant. There's a story about Richard Feynman, Nobel Prize winning physicist, I think. Actually, I don't know if he won a Nobel Prize or not, but he was up there with those kind of people. Somebody asked him, how did you get so brilliant? He said, oh, that's easy. My parents locked me out of the house every day, and behind our house was a junkyard. And I just went to the junkyard and I tinkered. I took things apart, I rebuilt them, I built new things. And he says, everything I did with my hands as a child became my brilliance later on. All right, so geometry. So I've talked about physics, astronomy, geology, mineralogy. We have geometry, business math. We have Rome, Islam, Middle Ages. And then we have European geography. All right? And the European geography comes in nicely with the study of Rome in the Middle Ages. We are focusing a lot in 6th grade on Europe. And that's okay, because Europe is an important part of world history. Doesn't mean we're going to focus on Europe in every grade. Some people accuse the Waldorf curriculum of being Eurocentric, and I say it certainly doesn't have to be, right? I always just assumed it was our job to bring the world to our students. But in this block, we are focused on Europe for the fact that perhaps, a lot of what happened in Europe became the foundation for a lot of modern culture. Certainly, what happened in the Americas later on, and, systems of governance and economics which have been exported throughout the world. So it's important for them to understand. And don't worry, we will get to Africa. We do South America, we do North America, we do Asia. It all gets covered, all right? So don't worry. But in the 6th grade European geography block, we talk about this land that was shaped by the Romans, by the Germanic peoples, by the Celts, by the Slavs, and by the Arabs. And that's one of my favorite things to teach about, is that Islamic civilization had a mega impact on Europe going forward and on the rest of the world, especially in the realms of science, literature, philosophy. And so I think that's important to understand. If your family and your children are Muslim, you will already understand that. If you're not, it's important to understand that, to have a sense that everything under the sun brings its gifts to the world. Okay, so let me just leave you with a couple of thoughts here. In working with your 6th grader, know that your gesture as an educator and as a parent is going to have to shift. Okay? Learn to respect the rebellion. Learn to bring humor. And not humor that denigrates, but that lifts up, that lightens things. Be ready for wild things to be said. 6th graders often don't realize the impact of what they're saying. They're trying on this new sense of, I have a personality of my own. Like one day, I had this child in my class. I had a wonderful relationship with this child. She was like my golden child in the class. Lots of, reverence. She had lots of reverence for me and for what I taught. And and we had a lot in common. I'm a musician and a speech artist, and she loved that. She starred in plays, not just in our in the school, but outside of school. And so there was just like this really strong kinship there and a lot of respect, you know. And then one day I said to her, I don't even remember what I said. It was something like, well, why don't you do so and such? And she says, yeah, well, why don't you just shut your mouth? And it was like being slapped, you know. And or no, she said, oh, well, why don't you just be quiet? That's what she said. And it was like she gave me this attitude, and then it never happened again. And middle schoolers can be like that because they're just trying stuff on. So this is an important rule of thumb. Take nothing personally. Take nothing personally, and, you know, try to handle what comes with a light touch, with humor, because they're feeling this heaviness of puberty coming. And, you know, if you take it personally, it's just going to make it worse. It's going to be a vicious cycle. So just step back. Don't take it personally. Let them know also clearly when they're violating boundaries, like that's not okay. You know, it's not okay to talk to me like that, but don't have attachment to it, because like you can say it and they might be like, whatever, blah, 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 blah. Don't have attachment to how they take it. You just say it. It's like homeopathic medicine. It works over time, right? Just say it. Even if they give you more attitude, just let it go. You know, make a joke when you can. All right. So that's all I have. I hope you've learned some things. Maybe you can go back and, you know, read what you wrote about sixth grade that you knew beforehand and compare it to what you know now. All right. And otherwise, that's all I have. So thank you very much. And I hope you enjoy working through the sixth grade blocks. Take care. Bye-bye.